All right, guys, just want to welcome back to your Everything College Football podcast. Today, I'll be doing my preview and prediction for a big SEC showdown going down in Week 11 of college football between Ole Miss and Georgia. Bulldogs 3.5-point favorites, 55.5 is the total. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC, live from Vaught Hemingway Stadium in Oxford, Mississippi. Getting things started with the Georgia offense. It's been a tough year for this unit. They're certainly still amongst the best in college football with their rankings and their resume, but this unit has just not been the same that we're accustomed to seeing. Typically they're just phenomenal against man coverage and almost unguardable. And this year it's been the far opposite. We'll start with Carson Beck, a guy who has 11 interceptions this year, had 3 against Alabama. That was all in the first 5 games. Over the last 3, though, he's got 8 of them, including 3 each against Texas and Florida, where he's just blatantly making mistakes, throwing it in bad coverage, throwing inaccurate balls, just not fully seeing the field. This is a guy that seems incredibly rattled, especially on the road this year. In the second half against Bama, he was on fire, and that's where he can, flip that switch and really make the plays we're accustomed to seeing with his precision, his accuracy. He has great rip on the football, and I think his intermediate velocity is just phenomenal. And you've just not seen that really too much this season. Just doesn't seem to be playing confident football. I mean, overall, he's just incredibly rattled, especially on the road. You're going to have a road matchup here against a pretty good defense. So Carson Beck, 55% completion rating, does have 17 touchdowns, has 2 games of 400-plus yards this year against the aforementioned Bama and then against Miss State, where they only won that game by 10 and what kind of seemed like a bit of a shootout. He's just not been the kind of field general you expect, and I think you want to put him in passing situations, drop back pass scenarios, and that's where he's really going to light you up. And I think a big reason why he's had so many struggles is they just have not been able to run the ball, and he's great off of play action, and that threat, if you're running the ball, usually leads to committing more bodies to the line of scrimmage, and they end up getting a lot of man coverage, and they just get great separation typically. But this year, the run game's not been good. They don't have 200 yards yet this year in a game. They've only ran for over 150 twice, and that was in the first 2 weeks against Clemson and an FCS opponent. They've just not been that great. They're still putting up about 4.5 yards per carry. They do have 15 touchdowns. This is a group that's certainly still hard to defend. You want to monitor Trevor Etienne's status. He was really banged up in the Florida game after only just a couple of touches, 7 for 31. Has about 453 yards on the year with 7 scores. If he's banged up or isn't fully able to get the go, Nate Frazier, the true freshman, will be the guy they lean to as their RB1. Because Branson Robinson, he's still beat up. I don't think he's going to be, fully healthy for this game either. Frazier had 19 carries for 82 yards, and he had 11 for 83 against Clemson in the opener. The first stat line was this past Saturday. So he's done very respectable, has a touchdown in each of those games when he's been, the bell cow for them. Dylan Bell, I think he'll get a handful of touches as well if they don't really have much of a number 2 running back. So, I mean, things are kind of looking gloomy for Georgia right now because your quarterback's struggling, you can't run the ball, and your backfield has not a lot of depth, not a lot of health. It's certainly not great for Georgia. And this offensive line's kind of a big reason why. I knew coming into the season the tackles would be a bit of a liability. Ernest Green on the left side and then the right side Xavier Truss. I just don't think these guys are all that great. They've been all right in pass protection, but in terms of run blocking, they're just not that physical. On the interior, they're still sound. Dylan Fairchild at left guard's having a great year in pass protection. Jared Wilson's probably been the best offensive lineman for the Bulldogs. And then right guard Micah Morris, he's been also a phenomenal impact performer in pass protection, hoping to get Tate Ratledge back full time. I imagine he'll be ready to go for the starting lineup. Played, I think, 44 snaps against Florida. He was kind of pressed into action due to some injuries there as well, of guys going down. Ratledge, of course, missed a good portion of this season, but they're hoping they get him back because they really need his physicality. And last year, they demolished Ole Miss in terms of running the ball, but this is a new look Ole Miss defense. They have a legit defensive line, has a lot of nice big bodies. They're physical as well. So this is going to be a massive test for Georgia because, again, they can't really run the ball that well to play action. It's certainly not something working in their favor. And Beckham has not been very good on the road. So for Georgia to be in the spot they're in, I think it's pretty impressive at this moment in time considering the offensive struggles. At wide receiver, Arian Smith, one guy that's finally fully healthy, and he's got plenty of speed. Impact performer for them, leading the way at 503 yards. Dominic Lovett has a team-high 38 receptions for 389. And the aforementioned Dylan Bell is the third leading pass catcher with the team high 4 touchdowns, 360 yards on 30 grabs. Tight end Lawson Lucky gets involved a good bit as well. Certainly like to find him down the seams. That's about it. Those are the 4 guys that are going to get involved the most. London Humphreys on occasion. Cash Jones, Oscar Delp, a couple of other guys they got. But for the most part, again, this Georgia offense has just not looked the same. Certainly have the personnel, though, but I don't know if this is going to be the matchup to really find out what they're made of. They just played a Florida defense that wasn't very good early on in the year. Last month or so, they've really picked up the pace. They were playing against third, fourth string cornerbacks, and they weren't really having that much success in the pass game. So it's certainly a tad concerning. It's going to be a great opportunity to see what Georgia's made of, though, in this road matchup. Now we move to an Ole Miss offense that also, has a lot of criticisms from me. They just have not really clicked in SEC play until this past Saturday. They put in an absolute clinic against Arkansas, scoring 63 points. But before that, it wasn't great. They put up only 26 on LSU in a losing effort. Couldn't close that game out. 17 against Kentucky at home. Less than 30 in the other two matchups. They just beat up on a bunch of poor opponents early on in the year. They really want to run up their numbers. Last year, there's kind of a problem, too. The only two losses is where they combined for only 27 points against Georgia and Alabama. And it's just been really upsetting to see Lane Kiffin be this, offensive architect. But when it comes to the tougher defenses, they're just completely stumped. It's kind of been that way for a little bit now, where they're just not all that great. The last couple of years, it seems they just don't operate against tough defenses like this. And it seems like it'd be a pretty tough matchup. And, you'll hope they can continue to stay hot because it'll be real embarrassing if Jackson Dart goes from 515 yards and 6 touchdowns against the Hogs to putting up less than 20 points against Georgia. Phenomenal effort there. This is a guy that can certainly hurt you with his legs as well. They've certainly shied away from that a little bit more, trying to keep him healthier as the year goes on. It's typically good for about 10 carries per game, though. A lot of design quarterback runs for him. 3 touchdowns on the year rushing, 254 yards. 21 touchdowns, only 3 picks through the air. Dart, of course, I think he's doing tremendous. The RPOs that Ole Miss runs, certainly an area of weakness for opponents. And that's something they can certainly allow to, guys of the secondary cheating up if they're typically running the ball well, which this year they also haven't been all that great in conference play. We'll look at some of the weapons he has to throw to. Antoine Wells, this guy's tremendous. Over 20 yards per catch for him. 469 yards as the number 4 receiver is very impressive. Jordan Watkins coming off a Heisman-like performance. 254 yards and 5 touchdowns on 8 receptions. Had only topped 70 yards twice this season before that. So he really stepped up in Trey Harris's absence. Of course, Trey Harris has missed the last couple of games. I anticipate he'll be healthy for this game. This is a guy they need. 141 yards per game, almost 1,000 on the year, has 6 touchdowns. I mean, this production is ridiculous. He's going to get a lot of work. And he's got to play in this game, so I certainly think he probably could have got the go if they needed him last week. But I certainly anticipate he'll be on the field against Georgia. And then number 2 leading receiver, Caden Lee, brings some speed to the table at 175 pounds, 615 yards. 1 touchdown all the way back in week 1. Hasn't found the end zone since, but a couple of 100-yard games over the past couple weeks. This is a great Ole Miss receiving group, and of course you have tight end Caden Priestcorn. He's going to play a good bit. 274 yards from him. And then we've seen Daquan Wright, the other tight end. He really stepped up, career game from him. 9 grabs for 99 yards and a pair of touchdowns against Arkansas. So this is a team that they're red hot at the right moment. They're certainly clicking, which is finally nice to see because it really had been a struggle in conference play. Certainly playing some tough defenses. SC, South Carolina, Oklahoma even has a tough defense. And LSU would have been pretty impressive for a long stretch there. So certainly facing some tough units, but I certainly expect them with this much talent to kind of overwhelm their opposition instead of vice versa. You look at the running back group. I thought it was pretty deep coming into the year, but injuries have certainly hampered them. Ulysses Bentley not getting a whole lot of touches. Matt Jones kind of a quiet running back. It's really Henry Parrish, and it's his show. 678 yards and 10 touchdowns upon his return back from Miami. In conference play, it hasn't been great. 180 yards against LSU is the most that they've had. And they certainly want to run the ball. And when they can, and they can have some tempo, that's where they, again, hurt you with those RPOs. But they had success last week without the run game, only 132 yards on 42 attempts. They have 24 rushing touchdowns on the year, 1 in each game so far. So this is an offense that typically run first, and they can do everything after that. So Georgia's got to be able to contain this rushing attack, and I think they certainly should, just because I don't think the Ole Miss O-line's all that good. Now's the biggest concern. I think most people felt it was the biggest weakness of this football team coming into the year. Certainly kind of proven to be true. Over at left tackle, Diego Pons, he's been respectable at left tackle, but nothing great. Left guard, it's another guy, Nate Caleppo. He's a Washington transfer. Him and Julius Buelow at the 2 guard spots transferred over from Washington. Elite O-line the Huskies had last year, but these 2 guys were, quite frankly, the weakest links on that offensive line, and they've not really been all that stellar other than bringing a boatload of experience to the table. Reese McIntyre at center. So having a good year in pass pro. Not much of a run blocker, though. And then Micah Pettis, I'd say he's the best player on the O-line at right tackle. Just not that good of a group. And they went out and added a lot of transfers and nobody that really, really impressed you. Again, even the guards from Washington, I don't think were all that stout. Again, they played a lot of football against some very tough defenses. I think in terms of communication, they'll certainly be sound because they do have experience across the board. But this is certainly a unit that's not all that good in pass protection. Their running backs aren't all that good in pass protection either, especially Henry Parrish. It's just a bit of an issue for them. They're going up against a tough Georgia defensive line. We'll move to that Bulldog defense. They haven't been as great as we are accustomed to seeing against the run. It's certainly a team that's very tough, but they had a stretch where they gave up back-to-back 170-yard rushing efforts. Ford at times had a little bit of success. Not that they could really, maintain throughout the game, especially when they were down to a third-string quarterback. Teams are having success just running the ball straight downhill at them. I know Bama had a lot of success with a QB run. Kentucky was, kind of outclassing them with physicality. And I don't expect Ole Miss to do that. It's really going to be predicated on scheme more than anything in Dart. And he's going to be a physical affair for him. They're going to have to use his legs a good bit to win this contest. And that's where this is a sharp Georgia defensive line comes in handy. Tyrion Ingrams-Dawkins has really been the standout for them. Christian Miller, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson whenever he's been healthy. This is a team that's still got a lot of good players. Chaz Chambliss, he's been really showcasing improvements this year as an edge rusher. Not a guy, just more of an effort player, not a guy that's going to win with just pure skill or athletic ability. Michael Williams, he's an inconsistent player, but he's a real force off the edge. You've seen him against Texas, what he could do. 2 sacks in that one, where he was highly aggressive, just overwhelming the best tackle in football in Kelvin Banks. And you certainly wonder how much of that energy can be sustained, because you didn't see it against Florida, and I kind of figured they probably wouldn't play that same game that they did, and they didn't for the most part. They weren't, as disruptive. That could certainly change on a dime, though, after a tough outing against the Gators in a game they kind of got outplayed in for the most part. Great defensive line, though. Good run defense. I wouldn't call it great. You look at the middle of their defense, the linebacking group. I think it's probably the best in America. What you see what C.J. Allen does, 41 tackles, had a big interception against Florida. Jalen Walker. I think this guy's just tremendous. He's a phenomenal QB spy because his athletic ability is just great. He's a great edge rusher as well, 4.5 sacks. I mean, he's really impressive versatility. I think Jalen Walker is one of the most underrated, underappreciated players in all of America. Highly impressive there. Raylan Wilson, of course, he's having a pretty sound season. As the number 2 linebacker for them, still want to monitor Smail Munden's availability. It seems like he's trending in the right direction. I don't know if he'll play in this game, though. But they've got these other guys I just alluded to. They're stepping up and they've been good against the run. C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, though, in coverage. Certainly a tad shaky. There's plenty of matchups here that could be vulnerable for them. But nonetheless, there's not too many, issues with this Florida or Georgia front seven. That is, I think it's a great unit. The overall, they have nice versatility and they still have nice physicality. They still got guys that can shoot gaps up front, even if it's not, like it was a couple years ago, all the first rounders, because they don't really have that one standout. But they certainly have guys that play correct Georgia football the right way. I think that's the biggest problem with this defense is just the scheming is just so tremendous, and they do have a lot of athletes across the board. Look at the secondary. A unit that has times, throughout Kirby's tenure, certainly been prone to letting down and just getting beaten matchups, quite frank. And, you haven't really seen that much this year, other than really Ryan Williams kind of tearing them apart. And, this is a versatile receiving group for Ole Miss. They're incredibly deep, incredibly productive. You've seen Malachi Starks against Florida got burned deep on he bit on a run fake, came up, and they threw it behind him. Certainly don't expect to see those kind of plays often from him, but this is an offense that's going to look to do the same thing, again, with those RPOs. He's a great coverage player, phenomenal run defender, really good tackler. Malachi Starks, one of the best defensive players in the country. Dan Jackson, the guy who's really showcased some nice improvements this year. I like what he's been doing in coverage. And as a tackler, only 3 of those missed this year. He's not really much of a run stopper. Not much prowess there, but I think he's a great player, in terms of his improvements. And then KJ Bolden, the 5-star freshman, been getting on the field a good bit this year. He's also been tremendous in coverage, and there's going to be a lot of tests here. To be a lot of snaps, most likely for Ole Miss if they're clicking. So you're going to need to stay fresh at that position. Janelle Aguero in the slot, he's been all right. He's going to have a lot of different matchups. Caden Prieskorn, Lee Watkins. He's going to have a couple of different guys he's going to have to match up with, so they're going to try and take advantage of him. Hasn't been all that great for them, a young player. Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey, again, two corners that have kind of been battle tested. Neither of them have really been standouts, and Daniel Harris has been even worse. So this is not really a position of strength for Georgia, I don't think. And again, the scheming is tremendous, so certainly you want to try avoiding putting them on islands as much as possible. But one of these two guys is going to see Trey Harris very often. I think that could certainly pose issues for the Georgia defense. But with how aggressive they are up front, how good the linebackers are, there's a lot of chaos that you have to get through. It's not just as simple as throwing it one-on-one against these guys, because it's going to be hard to earn those opportunities. The Bulldogs scheme really offsets any issues they potentially have. Pretty good game from the secondary against Florida. They didn't really have much of a threat. They give up some big plays here and there, and especially that one touchdown. But after Lagway went down, really wasn't much of a challenge. So you certainly wonder how they will adjust to this one, because even though the one against Texas was pretty big, this one's probably just as different or even harder because of how deep they really are. Of course, Kiffin's a great offensive coach, supposedly. Now we move forward to the Ole Miss defense. Coming into the season, you really wondered what these additions would do for them from the portal, because last year again they gave up 300 yards rushing to Georgia, and they had some good players already, so it was really disappointing. Guys like Jared Ivey and J.J. Pegues, they went to the portal and added two phenomenal players in Princely Unamanel and Walter Nolan. Those guys have a combined 16.5 TFL. As a team, they were just ridiculous. 94 tackles for loss. That's by far the most in FBS. The next most is 77 by Duke. I mean, this is a team that generates double-figure tackle for losses in almost every game. They played LSU. They only had 3. That's an elite offensive line they faced, and they certainly didn't exactly pass the challenge. That's a game they ended up losing, so they certainly could have been better in that regard. But I alluded to some of the guys, Ivy and Pegues, the veterans, and the 2 transfers. 4 guys have 10-plus TFL, including Santorini Perkins, who's a highly athletic linebacker, and then Chris Paul, a veteran that's transferred from a couple of different destinations. Perkins leads the way with 12.5, has 9 sacks as well. This is a guy who's great versatility. He was a 5-star coming out of high school. He's an athletic freak. And you've seen it early on last year. He was able to generate a couple of sacks, and he's been the best edge rusher for them. So I certainly wonder what his versatility can provide in this regard. And Unamanel, and he's played in plenty of matchups against Georgia. I think they have guys that can certainly win matchups against these tackles. Princely has 7.5 sacks this year. Walter Nolan, he's a highly disruptive player despite having a little bit less of production, playing from the interior. Absolutely love this D-line. They are elite in all regards. I don't think it's a joke one bit. And then Xavier Harris, this is a guy that's got plenty of size. He'll get on the field, plenty of snaps as well. 320 pounds, 6'7". Akilo Stone, Jamarius Brown. I mean, this is a very, very good defensive line. I don't think there's any fluke about them. We'll see how they can do against this offensive line. You hope they can do better than they did against LSU, or even if they don't, generate a whole lot of production. That's still a lot of. They did disrupt a lot, because there was a lot of throwaways from Nussmeier that entire game. He didn't complete a very high percentage, so I mean they were able to generate plenty of pressure in that contest. And again, the linebackers I think are phenomenal. T.J. Daugherty. Number 2 linebacker has been abysmal in coverage. Kahari Coleman hasn't really been all that much better, outside of Chris Paul, who's been, phenomenal in all regards. Who can you really lean on? And I think with Perkins, even though he plays primarily off the edge, this is a guy that might have to be moved to the middle a little bit. He doesn't have to spy or anything like that. But I think this is a legit front 7. They got guys that can get after the passer. I think Ole Miss has a great shot at winning those matchups on this side of the ball. They're secondary. Trey Washington, John Saunders, 2 veteran safeties. These guys are really good against the run. Washington, a much better coverage performer than Saunders, but these guys are veterans. They've played a lot of ball in this conference. Pretty confident in their ability to come out here and play some good reps for Ole Miss, because the secondary starter. They're going to have tests against some really good Georgia wide receivers. Saunders, he plays in the slot a lot, a guy who plays plenty during the games. Trey Amos coming over from Alabama, he's been tremendous. He's played a very good corner for them. This cornerback room would be in some trouble if they didn't have him, because the rest of the guys just have not been all that good. Jaden Canati, Braden Turnage, and Isaiah Hamilton. I mean, these are just average performers at best in the secondary. Amos with his 3 interceptions leading the way. Been a very productive player with 11 pass breakups as well. So he's been a real asset for them. Canati does have 10 pass breakups of his own, but he's more of an inconsistent player. This is a team that's got a lot of production on this side of the ball. I don't think this defense is a fluke one bit, and they really haven't been exposed at all. LSU, they're able to stay alive on a 4th down conversion late in that game, and they ended up pushing it to overtime and won a one-on-one battle in the end zone. That's literally it, though. That's about all they've done. I know they give up 31 points, almost 500 yards to Arkansas, but that was garbage time. All of it was. They were up big. His defense still produced at a high level. So this is a very good Rebel defense. This is not the one from early on in Kiffin's tenure. Pete Golding's done a great job getting new players in and putting them into the scheme, and they've been great. Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. I think quarterback right now, you got to give it to Jackson Dart and Ole Miss. Beck's just not playing at that good of a level. Had 3 interceptions last week, while the guy he's went up against had SEC records. So I think at running back, I want to give it to Georgia if ETN plays. I just got to probably leave Ole Miss as well on that one. I'm going to go ahead and call it even with some uncertainty, and Ole Miss not being as deep as they're originally supposed to be. Wide receiver for the Rebels is going to be for them. O-line, I think Georgia's a clear edge there. D-line, Ole Miss. I'm just raving about this unit. I think they are phenomenal. And then linebacker and DB. I'll give it to Georgia, even though Ole Miss, they're not lacking too far behind in those positions, it seems themselves. I think they certainly have more athletic ability, though, at those two positions. Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction, keys to the game. Georgia, play with the energy and doubt like you did versus Texas. Beck needs to get in sync at some point. And I think for Ole Miss, be stout in the middle of the field in coverage, because that's where they can hurt you the most. And Kiffin, finally showcase your offensive prowess. I think it's just a big criticism of mine, where against tough defenses, he hasn't showed up. Typically in the past, Lincoln Riley, for example, a bright offensive mind. When he played tough defenses, he would have them on skates. And, Ole Miss, they're not even being competitive, really. You saw that last year. They just could not move the ball at all against these tough defenses. Georgia had 352 yards in a blowout, 301 yards in 14-point loss to Alabama. So they just have not been great against tough opponents. I want to see them showcase a little bit more of that in this game. I really want to pick Ole Miss to win it, because I really think that they have a nice edge when it comes to their defensive pass rushers against those tackles. And I think this offense, they are going to show up a little bit more. It's hard for me to pick Georgia to lose, coming off kind of a upsetting effort against Florida. It wasn't very good, even against the third string quarterback. They just could not pull away, and it took some mistakes to finally be able to put that game away. And it kind of seems like how they were going into Texas, where they were very angry, told they can't do it. They were significantly doubted. I'm not sure if the energy will be the same in the building this week. I anticipate a little bit of that being the same, though. I think Georgia's going to get the job done 30-24, but I think this is a scary game for the Bulldogs, because Ole Miss has all the pieces in the world to completely knock them off. I think that's why the spread's only 3.5 in favor of Georgia. It just seems like too much doubt will be creeping into the minds of the Bulldogs, and that's when they're going to be the most dangerous. So this would be a great game. Again, I think the Rebels can completely win this one, and it would certainly add a lot of fuel to the fire in terms of the college football playoff race. That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.